The small community hall was usually quiet in the mornings. Most people only came there for weekend meetings or birthday parties. The old piano sitting near the corner had not been touched in years. Dust covered the black surface, and one of the keys made a strange clicking sound whenever someone pressed it. Nobody paid attention to it anymore. One rainy afternoon, a young child wandered inside while the mother cleaned tables after an event. The child was only 4 years old, small enough that the piano bench looked too high to climb alone. While the rain tapped softly against the windows, the child stared at the piano with wide, curious eyes. The mother noticed the silence and looked around nervously. Usually the child was running around, asking questions every few seconds. But now there was complete focus. Tiny fingers touched one key, then another. The sounds were uneven and slow, but the child smiled like something magical had just happened. An elderly man arranging chairs nearby looked over and chuckled softly. "That piano barely works anymore," he said, but the child did not care. Another key was pressed, then another. Soon random notes filled the room. The mother gently called out, "Come on, it's time to go." The child shook their head immediately. Just one more. That became the first of many afternoons beside the old piano. Every day after preschool, the child begged to visit the community hall again. Sometimes the mother was too tired after work, but the child would pull at her sleeve and ask again and again until she finally smiled and agreed. The father did not think much of it at first. He believed children quickly lost interest in things. One week it could be drawing. The next week it could be toy cars. He expected the piano excitement to disappear soon. But it didn't. The child kept returning to the piano every single day. At home, spoons became drumsticks on the kitchen table. Fingers tapped invisible piano keys while eating dinner. Even before sleeping, the child would quietly hum little melodies while staring at the ceiling. One evening, the family was watching television when a classical music performance appeared on the screen. A pianist sat under bright lights inside a giant concert hall. The child suddenly stopped moving, completely still. Then the music began. The soft opening notes of Beethoven's Für Elise filled the room. The child's eyes grew wide. Without blinking, the child walked closer to the television and sat directly in front of it. Every note seemed to pull the child deeper into the music. The mother smiled at first, thinking it was cute. But after the performance ended, something surprising happened. The child walked to the kitchen table and began tapping the exact rhythm with tiny fingers. Not perfect, not complete, but recognizable. The father lowered the television remote slowly. "Wait," he whispered. The child continued repeating the melody from memory. The next day at the community hall, the child searched for those same notes on the old piano. Took time. Some keys sounded wrong. Some fingers slipped. But little by little, the melody started appearing. The elderly man arranging chairs heard it and froze. "That sounds familiar," he murmured. The mother stared in shock. Nobody had taught the child anything about piano. No lessons. No music books. Nothing. Yet somehow the child remembered the melody after hearing it only once. Over the following weeks, the child became obsessed with learning the song. Sometimes frustration caused tears when the fingers could not move fast enough. Tiny hands struggled to stretch across the keys. But each mistake only made the child more determined. The father started coming to the community hall after work just to watch quietly from the back corner. He noticed something unusual. Most children lost focus after 10 minutes. But this child stayed at the piano for nearly an hour without getting bored. One afternoon, a woman entered the hall while searching for a lost scarf after a music class nearby. She suddenly paused after hearing the piano. At first, she assumed an older student was practicing. Then she turned the corner and saw the tiny child sitting at the piano bench. Her mouth opened in surprise. The child was slowly playing pieces of Für Elise. Not perfectly, but clearly. The woman stepped closer carefully. Who taught this child? The parents exchanged confused looks. Nobody, the mother answered honestly. The woman introduced herself as a local piano teacher. She had taught music for nearly 20 years and immediately noticed something special. It was not only memory, it was feeling. The child played with emotion. Even simple notes sounded meaningful. The teacher crouched beside the piano gently. "Can you play that part again?" The child nodded proudly and tried once more. After listening quietly, the teacher smiled. "This is very rare." The parents laughed nervously, unsure if she was serious. The teacher asked if the child had ever touched a real piano before the community hall one. "No," the father replied. The teacher looked back at the tiny hands resting on the keys. "You should think about lessons." The parents exchanged another worried glance. Money was already tight. Rent, food, school supplies, and bills took nearly everything they earned. Piano lessons sounded impossible. The teacher seemed to understand immediately. "I can teach once a week," she offered softly. "No cost for now." The mother's eyes widened. "Really?" The teacher nodded. "I want to see what this child can do." The first lesson happened 2 days later. The child arrived excited but nervous. The teacher's studio looked very different from the dusty community hall. A polished grand piano stood near the window, shining under warm lights. For a moment, the child became shy. "What if I break it?" the child whispered. The teacher smiled kindly. "Music is not about perfection. Just play." Tiny fingers touched the keys carefully. The sound was beautiful, much clearer than the old piano. The child's face lit up instantly. During the lesson, the teacher noticed something incredible. The child learned patterns unusually fast. Notes repeated after hearing them only a few times. Even rhythm mistakes were corrected quickly. But there were still challenges. The child was only 4 years old. Sometimes attention disappeared suddenly. 1 minute there was serious concentration. The next minute there was giggling about funny-shaped music notes. The teacher never became angry. Instead, she turned lessons into little games and stories. High notes became birds in the sky. Low notes became giant footsteps. The child loved every second of it. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, Für Elise became smoother. The teacher finally decided to record a short practice video and send it to a few musician friends. She expected polite reactions. Instead, phones started ringing almost immediately. "Is this real? How old is this child? This cannot be 4 years old." One local music organizer even asked if the child could perform at a small children's event. The parents hesitated. They worried the child was too young for pressure or public attention. But the teacher explained that it would only be a friendly event with families and teachers. Nothing serious. The child overheard the conversation and became excited instantly. "Can I play the Beethoven song?" The teacher smiled. "Yes, if you want to." For the next few weeks, practice became more serious. The child still laughed and played around sometimes, but now there was also determination. Every correct section brought huge smiles. Every mistake brought stubborn frustration. One evening, after a difficult practice, the child crossed tiny arms and declared, "My fingers are too small." The father sat beside the piano quietly. "You know," he said gently, "big things can start with small hands." The child looked thoughtful for a moment, then slowly turned back toward the piano. Practice continued. Soon the day of the local performance arrived. The community center was crowded with parents holding cameras and chatting loudly. Older children warmed up confidently backstage. Some had expensive clothes and years of training. Then the tiny 4-year-old walked in holding the mother's hand. People immediately stared. A few smiled warmly. Others looked doubtful. One woman whispered, "That child is performing?" The child suddenly became nervous after hearing the crowd. Tiny hands gripped the mother's sleeve tightly. "I don't want everyone looking at me," the child whispered. The mother knelt down gently. "You don't have to be perfect. Just play the music you love." The teacher crouched beside them too. "Pretend it's only you and the piano." The child took a deep breath. Then the announcer called the name. The audience clapped politely as the tiny performer walked slowly toward the piano bench. Some people even pulled out phones immediately, expecting a cute moment more than a serious performance. The child climbed onto the bench carefully. For a second, the entire room felt enormous. The lights looked too bright. The crowd looked endless. The child's feet barely reached the pedals. A deep, nervous breath filled the silence. Then tiny fingers touched the keys. The first notes of Für Elise floated softly through the room. And suddenly, every whisper disappeared. The room stayed completely silent for a moment after the final note of Für Elise faded away. Nobody expected such calm and beautiful music from someone so small. Even the older students waiting backstage stopped whispering and stared toward the piano. Then the audience burst into applause. Some people stood up immediately. Others looked at each other with shocked expressions, like they were trying to understand what they had just heard. The child blinked in surprise at the loud clapping. For a second, there was confusion instead of excitement. The tiny performer simply looked around the room, wondering why everyone suddenly seemed emotional. The teacher smiled proudly from the side of the stage. The mother wiped tears from her eyes, and the father clapped harder than anyone else in the room. The child climbed carefully off the piano bench and gave a shy little wave before hurrying backstage. As soon as the curtain closed, the nervous expression disappeared. "Did I do okay?" the child asked softly. The mother laughed through happy tears. "You did more than okay." The teacher knelt beside the child. "You made people feel something. That matters most." The child smiled proudly, but only for a second before asking, "Can we get ice cream now?" The parents laughed immediately. That simple question reminded everyone that this was still just a 4-year-old child. After the event ended, several parents approached the family. Some congratulated them warmly. Others looked confused and full of questions. How long has the child been learning piano? Which music school teaches this level? Are there professional musicians in your family? The parents answered honestly every time. No, no, and no. That only made people more surprised. One man who helped organize local youth events asked the teacher quietly, "Has anyone recorded the performance?" The teacher nodded and held up her phone. "Good," the organizer said. "People need to see this." The next morning, the video was uploaded online. At first, only a few people watched it. Friends shared it with family members. Music teachers sent it to co-workers. Parents showed it to other parents. Then suddenly the numbers started growing faster. Hundreds of views became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Comments appeared from everywhere. "Is this child really 4? That performance gave me chills. I cannot believe such tiny hands can play like that." The father stared at the phone screen in disbelief one evening while sitting at the kitchen table. "Look at this," he whispered. The mother leaned closer and gasped softly. The video had already spread far beyond their town. Meanwhile, the child remained completely unaware of how unusual everything had become. At home, life still felt normal. There were crayons scattered across the floor. Toy animals lined up beside the couch. Half-finished snacks sat forgotten near the piano practice books. The child still laughed loudly at cartoons and asked endless questions about everything. But one thing had definitely changed. More people now wanted to hear the music. A few days later, the teacher received a phone call from organizers of a larger children's piano competition in another city. They had seen the performance online and wanted the child to participate. The parents became nervous immediately. "A real competition?" the mother asked. The teacher nodded carefully. "Yes, bigger than the local event." The father looked worried. "There will be older children there." "Much older," the teacher admitted. For a moment, nobody spoke. The child sat nearby drawing musical notes on paper without understanding the seriousness of the conversation. Finally, the mother sighed softly. "Maybe it's too much too soon." The teacher understood the fear. Competitions could be stressful even for teenagers, let alone a 4-year-old. But before anyone could continue, the child looked up suddenly. "Will there be a piano there too?" The teacher smiled. "Yes. Then I want to go." The parents exchanged uncertain looks again. After many long conversations, they finally agreed to try. Only one competition. Nothing more. Just an experience. The following weeks became busier than ever before. Practice sessions grew longer, though the teacher remained careful not to push too hard. Sometimes the child became distracted after 20 minutes and started pretending the piano bench was a race car. Other times, there was surprising focus, especially when Für Elise was played. The teacher noticed something emotional happening whenever the melody began. The child's expression changed completely. Tiny fingers stopped fidgeting. The room became calm. It was almost like entering another world. One afternoon during practice, the child suddenly stopped halfway through the song. "What's wrong?" the teacher asked gently. The child looked down sadly. "I missed a note." "That's okay. But I wanted it perfect." The teacher sat beside the piano quietly. "Music is not about being perfect every second," she explained softly. "People remember how music makes them feel." The child thought about that for a moment, then slowly nodded. The teacher smiled. "Now play it again. But this time, don't worry about mistakes." The child started over, and somehow the performance sounded even more beautiful. As competition day approached, the family faced another challenge. Travel costs. The event was several hours away, and money was already tight. Hotel rooms, transportation, food, everything added pressure. The father quietly offered to skip paying a few bills until next month. The mother immediately refused. "We'll find another way." That evening, the teacher made a few phone calls without telling the family. By the next morning, several people from the local community center had quietly gathered enough donations to help cover the trip. The mother became emotional after hearing the news. "Why would people do this for us?" she whispered. The elderly man from the community hall smiled warmly. "Because that child brought joy to people." The child, meanwhile, celebrated by dancing around the living room wearing one sock and one shoe. Finally, competition day arrived. The city felt huge compared to their quiet neighborhood. Tall buildings stretched into the sky, and traffic noise filled the streets constantly. Inside the competition hall, nervous energy was everywhere. Older children practiced difficult piano pieces in corners. Parents rushed around carrying music books and garment bags. Teachers whispered last-minute instructions. The tiny 4-year-old looked around with wide eyes. "So many pianos," the child whispered excitedly. Several competitors stared in surprise after noticing the youngest participant. One older student quietly muttered, "That kid is competing?" Another shrugged. "Probably just for fun." The parents heard the comments but stayed silent. Backstage, nerves finally started hitting hard. The child's small hands suddenly felt cold. "I don't want everyone watching me," came the quiet whisper. The mother knelt down immediately. "You don't have to be scared." "But what if I mess up?" The father gently placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "Then you keep going." The teacher crouched beside them too. "Remember what we practiced. Just tell the story through the music." The child took a shaky breath. Then their name was called. The giant stage looked even bigger than the local one. Bright lights covered the piano like sunlight. Rows and rows of strangers filled the audience seats. Some people smiled kindly after seeing the tiny performer walk out. Others looked doubtful. The child climbed onto the piano bench slowly. For a second, there was complete silence. Then the first notes began. At first, the hands trembled slightly. One note came out softer than expected. The child panicked inside for a brief moment. But then something changed. The familiar melody of Für Elise started flowing naturally again. Muscle memory took over. The nervousness slowly faded. The audience leaned forward. The judges exchanged quick glances. Nobody expected such emotion from someone so young. Tiny fingers moved carefully across the keys, sometimes struggling to stretch but never giving up. The child played with complete focus, almost forgetting the crowd existed. By the middle of the performance, the room had become completely still. Even parents backstage quietly peeked through the curtains to listen. The final section arrived. The child pressed the last note softly. Silence. Then applause exploded across the hall. Louder than before. Much louder. One judge actually smiled while shaking their head in disbelief. The child blinked nervously, unsure whether the performance had truly gone well. Then something unexpected happened. The audience began standing up one by one. A standing ovation. The child stared in confusion at first, then slowly smiled. Backstage, the teacher covered her mouth emotionally. The father looked completely stunned, and the mother cried openly this time. After the performance, several judges approached the family personally. One older judge leaned down toward the child and said warmly, "You played with your heart today. Never lose that." The child nodded seriously before asking, "Did you like the fast part too?" The judge laughed softly. "Very much." Hours later, all competitors gathered for the award announcements. The child sat swinging tiny legs back and forth while holding a juice box, completely relaxed now. Third place was announced. Then second place. The parents squeezed each other's hands tightly. And first place. The room paused dramatically. Then the child's name echoed through the speakers. For 1 second, the family froze completely. The child looked around in confusion. "I won." The teacher laughed through tears. "Yes, you won." The audience erupted into applause once again as the tiny 4-year-old walked toward the stage to accept the trophy almost bigger than their own torso. Cameras flashed everywhere. But the child only cared about one thing. Holding the shiny trophy high and shouting happily, "Can we tell the piano at the community hall?" After winning first place at the city competition, life became very different for the little family. What had once been quiet piano lessons inside a small studio suddenly turned into phone calls, messages, invitations, and attention from strangers everywhere. The video of the performance spread even faster online after the competition victory. People from different countries started sharing clips of the tiny child playing Für Elise, with serious focus and tiny fingers barely reaching across the keys. Every morning the parents woke up to hundreds of new comments. "This child is unbelievable. A future piano legend. I got emotional listening to this." But mixed between the kind messages were other comments that hurt. "This can't be real. The parents are clearly forcing the child. No 4-year-old would choose classical music." The mother stopped reading the comments after a while. Some strangers acted like they knew everything about the family just from watching short videos online. One evening, she placed her phone down on the table with a tired sigh. "I don't like this anymore," she admitted quietly. The father understood exactly what she meant. The attention was becoming overwhelming. Reporters had started contacting them. Local news stations wanted interviews. Even people in grocery stores recognized the child now. Meanwhile, the child still cared mostly about cartoons, snacks, and stuffed animals. That contrast made everything feel strange. One afternoon, while leaving the piano studio, a woman rushed over excitedly with her phone already recording. "Can you play something for my followers?" she asked immediately. The child hid behind the mother's leg. The mother politely refused and walked away quickly. But the moment stayed in her mind the entire evening. "This is getting too big," she whispered later. The teacher agreed carefully. "We have to protect the child first. Music should stay joyful." For the next few days, the parents tried limiting online activity. They stopped posting practice videos and ignored most interview requests. Life became a little quieter again, at least for a while. Then a famous children's music page shared the competition clip. Everything exploded again. The video reached millions of views in only a few days. Television programs started discussing the performance. Music teachers from around the world reacted online. Some praised the child's emotional playing style. Others debated whether children so young should compete publicly. The parents suddenly found themselves at the center of arguments they never wanted. One night, the father sat silently at the kitchen table staring at a newspaper article about the child. "What if this changes everything?" he asked softly. The mother looked worried too. "It already has." Across the room, the child was building a tower out of cereal boxes while humming Für Elise, without realizing it. That small moment reminded the parents of something important. Inside the house, nothing had truly changed. The child was still just a child. The teacher continued lessons carefully, trying to keep pressure low. Some days were wonderful. The child laughed during practice, learned quickly, and played beautifully. Other days were completely different. There were moments of frustration now that had never appeared before. Tiny mistakes suddenly caused tears. Wrong notes led to crossed arms and silence. One afternoon, the child stopped in the middle of practice and pushed away from the piano angrily. "I can't do it." The teacher stayed calm. "What happened?" "My hands won't listen." The teacher looked closely and realized something important. The child was no longer simply enjoying music. Now there was fear. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of disappointing people. Fear created by all the attention surrounding the performances. The teacher gently closed the piano lid. "No more practice today," she said. The child looked surprised. Usually lessons continued until improvement happened. "But I played badly." "That's okay." The child looked down sadly. "People only clap when I play good." The teacher's heart sank hearing those words from someone so young. She moved closer and spoke softly. "Listen carefully. Music is not about making strangers happy every second. Music is about feeling something inside yourself." The child stayed quiet. The teacher continued. "When you first played the piano in that old community hall, nobody was watching. You smiled because the music made you happy. That feeling matters most." For a few seconds, the room stayed silent. Then the child whispered something heartbreaking. "What if people stop liking me if I make mistakes?" The teacher immediately shook her head. "The people who truly care about you will still love you even if every note is wrong." That evening, the teacher called the parents privately. "We need to slow things down," she explained carefully. The parents agreed immediately. For the next week, they canceled all public appearances and focused only on normal family life. The child spent more time outside playing, drawing pictures, and watching movies under blankets in the living room. At first, everything seemed better. The laughter returned. The stress faded a little. But one problem remained. The child no longer wanted to practice piano as much. The mother noticed it first. Usually the child rushed toward the piano after breakfast. Now there was hesitation. One morning, the father asked gently, "Want to play your Beethoven song?" The child shrugged quietly. "Maybe later." Later never came. Days passed like that. The parents became worried but tried not to push too hard. Then one rainy evening, the mother walked past the living room and stopped suddenly. Soft piano notes floated through the dark house. She peeked around the corner carefully. The child sat alone at the piano in pajamas, playing Für Elise slowly and softly. No cameras, no audience, no pressure, just music. The mother stayed completely still, not wanting to interrupt. The child made several mistakes but kept going anyway. Tiny fingers moved gently across the keys while rain tapped against the windows outside. For the first time in weeks, the child looked peaceful again. The father quietly joined the mother in the hallway. Neither spoke. They simply listened. After finishing the song, the child noticed them standing there and looked embarrassed. "I messed up the middle part," came the tiny voice. The father smiled softly. "I liked it anyway." The child thought for a moment before asking something unexpected. "Do I always have to play for other people now?" The question hit both parents hard. The mother walked over and knelt beside the piano bench. "No," she answered immediately. "You never have to." The child looked relieved. "You can play just for yourself too." That conversation changed everything. From that point forward, the parents and teacher created new rules together. Fewer competitions. Less online attention. More normal childhood moments. The teacher even started adding fun musical games again instead of constant serious practice. Sometimes lessons included silly songs or making up funny melodies about animals and cookies. Slowly, joy returned. Then another surprise arrived. A letter came from organizers of a national young musicians competition. Not local. Not citywide. National. The event included talented children from all across the country. The parents immediately looked nervous again. The mother placed the letter on the table carefully. "Maybe we should say no." The father nodded slowly. "Maybe." The teacher did not answer right away. She understood both sides. The child noticed everyone acting serious and climbed onto a chair to look at the letter. "What's that?" The teacher smiled gently. "Another piano competition invitation." The child became quiet for a moment, then asked, "Will there be a big piano?" "Probably a very big one." The child thought carefully. Then came another question. "Do I have to go?" The parents answered together. "No." The room became silent again. The child stared at the piano nearby for a long moment, then softly asked, "Can I think about it?" The adults exchanged surprised smiles. "Of course," the mother said. For the next 2 days, nobody mentioned the competition again. Then one afternoon during practice, the child suddenly played all of Für Elise without stopping once. The performance was calm, emotional, and confident again. After the final note, the teacher clapped quietly. "That was beautiful." The child smiled shyly. "I was pretending the piano was talking." The teacher laughed softly. "And what was it saying?" The child looked thoughtful before answering. "It said music is happier when I stop being scared." The teacher nearly became emotional hearing those words. Later that evening, the family sat together eating dinner when the child suddenly announced something. "I want to do the competition." The parents looked surprised. "Are you sure?" the father asked carefully. The child nodded. "But only if we still get ice cream after." The entire table burst into laughter. For the first time in weeks, the pressure felt lighter again. The next month became a balance between practice and normal life. Some mornings included piano lessons. Other days included trips to the park, cartoons on the couch, and bedtime stories. The parents became more protective too. They stopped allowing strangers to film the child in public. Interview requests were mostly declined. The teacher reminded everyone constantly that childhood mattered more than trophies. Still, the music kept improving naturally. Not because anyone forced it, because the child truly loved it. One evening near the national competition date, the teacher sat quietly listening during practice. The child played Für Elise differently now. Not just correctly, emotionally. There was softness in the slower parts and confidence in the faster sections. Somehow the music sounded older and wiser than a 4-year-old should understand. When the song ended, the teacher spoke quietly. "You know what makes your playing special?" The child shook their head. "You don't play to impress people. You play like you're telling a story." The child smiled proudly, then immediately ruined the emotional moment by asking, "Can stories also have pizza after them?" The teacher laughed so hard she nearly fell off the piano bench. And in that moment, everyone realized something important. No matter how famous the performances became, the tiny child at the piano was still wonderfully, completely 4 years old. The national competition changed everything again. But this time the family tried their best to stay calm. They no longer chased attention or excitement. After everything that had happened online, they understood how quickly pressure could grow around such a young child. The teacher reminded them constantly, "The goal is not fame. The goal is protecting the joy of music." Those words stayed in everyone's mind. Still, preparing for a national competition was a huge step. Talented young pianists from all over the country would attend. Some had trained since they were toddlers with expensive instructors and daily schedules. Others came from families filled with musicians. Meanwhile, the little 4-year-old still needed help tying shoes properly. That difference made the parents nervous. One evening, the father sat quietly watching practice from the corner of the room. The child was playing Für Elise slowly, carefully pressing each note with serious concentration. Then suddenly the music stopped. "I forgot the next part," the child said with frustration. The father smiled softly. "That happens to everybody. But not to the really good piano people." The teacher gently shook her head. "Even professionals forget sometimes." The child looked shocked. "Really?" "Of course," the teacher laughed. "They're human too." That answer seemed to relax the child immediately. As competition day came closer, reporters started contacting the family again after hearing the child would appear at the national event. Some offered interviews. Others wanted short videos or behind-the-scenes clips. This time the parents refused almost everything. The mother became especially protective after noticing how tired the child sometimes looked after public attention. One afternoon, while grocery shopping, a stranger recognized the child near the cereal aisle. "Oh my goodness!" the woman gasped loudly. "It's the piano child." Several people nearby turned immediately. The child froze. The woman excitedly asked, "Can you play something right now? Even on your phone maybe?" The mother stepped in politely. "Sorry, not today." The woman looked disappointed but walked away. As soon as she left, the child grabbed the mother's hand tightly. "I don't like when everyone stares," came the quiet whisper. The mother squeezed the tiny hand gently. "You don't owe performances to strangers." The child nodded slowly. That evening, the family made an important decision together. No more reading comments online. No more checking views or numbers. No more worrying about what strangers expected. From now on, music would stay inside the family, the lessons, and the stage itself. Nothing else. The teacher fully supported the idea. "You can't let the internet decide a child's happiness," she said firmly. Practice continued daily, but the atmosphere slowly became healthier again. Some sessions were serious. Others were playful and messy. One morning, the child accidentally played the wrong section so dramatically that everyone burst out laughing. "That sounded like the piano fell down the stairs," the father joked. The child laughed so hard that practice stopped completely for 10 minutes. Moments like that mattered. They reminded everyone this journey was supposed to be joyful. Then the national competition week finally arrived. The event was held in a massive concert center in another city. Just entering the building felt overwhelming. Giant chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Huge posters of famous musicians lined the walls. Contestants walked around carrying thick music books and expensive instrument cases. The little 4-year-old looked around in amazement. "This place is shiny," the child whispered. The teacher smiled. "Very shiny." At registration, several families recognized the child immediately from online videos. Whispers spread quickly through the room. "That's the 4-year-old. The one who plays Beethoven. I saw the performance online." The parents tried ignoring the attention, but it was impossible not to notice. Some reactions were kind. Others felt uncomfortable. One older parent quietly muttered nearby, "This competition is becoming entertainment now." The father heard it clearly but stayed silent. The teacher noticed his expression and gently shook her head. "Don't let comments distract you." Backstage rehearsals began later that afternoon. That was the moment the child first realized how serious the competition truly was. Beautiful piano music echoed everywhere. Older contestants played difficult pieces with incredible speed and confidence. Some teenagers practiced with perfect posture and flawless technique. The child stood silently beside the teacher, listening carefully. Tiny shoulders slowly dropped lower. "What's wrong?" the teacher asked softly. "They're better than me." The teacher knelt down immediately. "Music is not a race. But they play faster. Faster doesn't always mean better." The child looked uncertain. The teacher pointed gently toward the rehearsal piano. "Do you remember what makes your music special?" The child thought for a moment. "The story." The teacher smiled warmly. "Exactly." That answer helped a little. But nerves still grew stronger as the day continued. That night at the hotel, the child barely touched dinner. The mother became worried immediately. "Are you feeling okay?" The child nodded weakly, but something clearly felt wrong. Later, after getting ready for bed, the child suddenly whispered, "What if everyone is disappointed tomorrow?" The room became silent. The father sat beside the bed carefully. "Listen to me," he said softly. "We were proud of you before any trophies. We'll still be proud after tomorrow too." The child looked down at the blanket quietly. "But people think I'm special." The mother gently brushed hair away from the child's forehead. "You are special because of who you are, not because of winning." Tears slowly appeared in the child's eyes. "I'm scared." The teacher, who had stayed to review the next day's schedule, walked over quietly. "Being scared is normal," she said gently. Even grown musicians feel nervous before performing. The child sniffled softly. Really? The teacher nodded. Every single time sometimes. That finally made the child smile a little. The next morning started badly. The child woke up coughing. The mother immediately touched the forehead and frowned. Oh no! The child had a fever. Panic spread through the room instantly. The father searched for medicine while the teacher checked the competition schedule. The performance was only hours away. You need rest, the mother said worriedly. The child looked terrified. But I can't miss the piano. The teacher stayed calm even though she felt nervous too. Let's not decide anything yet. The morning became stressful quickly. The child looked pale and tired. Even sitting at the breakfast table seemed difficult. For the first time since this entire journey began, the parents seriously considered withdrawing from a competition. The father quietly said, "Health comes first." The child looked close to tears again. But I practiced so much. The mother hugged the small shaking shoulders gently. We know. Hours passed. The fever lowered slightly after medicine and rest, but the child still looked exhausted. The teacher finally sat alone with the child before leaving for the concert hall. You know something important? She asked softly. The child shook their head weakly. You do not have to perform today. The child blinked in surprise. It's okay if you can't. But everyone's waiting. The teacher smiled gently. That doesn't matter more than you. For several quiet seconds, the child stared down at tiny hands. Then came a very soft question. What if I just try? The teacher studied the child carefully. Only if you truly want to. The child nodded slowly. I want to play the story. By the time they arrived at the concert hall, nerves filled the air again. Contestants moved in and out of backstage areas while audience members found seats inside the giant theater. The child looked tiny compared to the enormous building. Several organizers rushed over kindly, worried after hearing about the illness. Are you sure about this? One asked carefully. The parents hesitated, but the child answered first. I want to play. Backstage, the atmosphere felt intense. Contestants stretched fingers nervously. Teachers whispered last-minute advice. Piano notes floated constantly through the hallways. The little 4-year-old sat quietly holding a small stuffed animal while waiting for the performance turn. The teacher crouched beside the chair. Remember, she said softly, winning is not the important part. The child nodded. What's important? The child thought carefully. Making the piano talk. The teacher smiled proudly. When the announcer finally called the name, the giant concert hall suddenly felt even bigger than before. The audience was huge. Bright stage lights covered the grand piano like sunlight. Rows of judges waited silently near the front. The child took one slow breath. Then another. Tiny shoes tapped nervously against the floor while walking toward the piano bench. The fever still caused slight weakness, but determination pushed the child forward anyway. Some audience members smiled warmly after seeing how small the performer was. Others looked doubtful. One judge quietly adjusted glasses while studying the tiny contestant carefully. The child climbed onto the piano bench slowly. For one long second, everything became silent. No whispers, no movement, only the child and the piano. Then tiny fingers touched the first note of Für Elise. And suddenly, the entire hall leaned forward to listen. The first notes of Für Elise floated gently through the giant concert hall, soft and careful at first, almost fragile. The child's tiny fingers trembled slightly from nervousness and fever, but the melody still carried clearly across the silent room. The audience watched closely. At first, many people smiled politely, expecting a cute performance from a talented little child. Some judges even sat back calmly with neutral expressions, prepared to simply encourage the youngest contestant. But after only a few seconds, something changed. The hall grew completely still. Every note felt emotional. Not perfect in the way older professional musicians played, but honest, real. The child played as if the piano was speaking instead of performing. The teacher noticed the shift immediately. People were no longer watching because the performer was 4 years old. They were listening because the music touched them. Backstage, several older contestants quietly peeked through the curtains. Some had practiced difficult pieces for years, yet they stood there frozen, listening carefully to the tiny child on stage. The mother clasped her hands tightly near her chest. Her eyes never left the piano. The father barely breathed. Meanwhile, the child slowly forgot about the audience completely. The fear disappeared little by little. The giant hall vanished. The bright lights disappeared. There was only the music now. Tiny fingers moved carefully across the keys. Some sections were soft like whispers. Others carried surprising confidence. Even the mistakes felt natural, almost emotional instead of wrong. One elderly judge leaned forward with watery eyes. Another quietly removed glasses and stared at the stage in disbelief. The child reached the middle section of the piece, the part that had once caused so much frustration during practice months ago. Back then, tiny hands could barely stretch correctly across the notes. Now the movement flowed naturally. The teacher felt tears building while watching. Not because the child played perfectly, but because she remembered everything behind this moment. The dusty old piano in the community hall. The first shaky notes. The laughter during lessons. The tears after mistakes. The fear of disappointing strangers. All of it had led here. The child pressed the next group of notes softly, swaying slightly with the rhythm. Then suddenly something unexpected happened. A cough interrupted the performance. The child froze for half a second. The audience held its breath immediately. Backstage, the mother's face filled with panic. The father whispered softly, "It's okay. Keep going." The child looked down at the piano keys quietly. For one long second, nobody moved. Then the tiny fingers started playing again. And somehow, the music became even more emotional after that moment. The audience could now see clearly how hard the child was fighting through nervousness, sickness, and pressure. Yet there was still determination inside every note. One woman in the crowd quietly wiped tears from her face. Another person whispered, "Unbelievable." The final section slowly approached. The child's small shoulders looked tired now, but the concentration never broke again. Every remaining note carried gentle feeling all the way to the end of the piece. Then came the final note. Soft, simple, beautiful. Silence filled the giant concert hall. Not a single person clapped immediately. The room stayed frozen for several seconds as the final sound faded away. The child looked confused by the silence. Tiny nervous eyes glanced toward the audience. Then suddenly the entire hall erupted. Thunderous applause exploded through the building. People stood up instantly. Some cheered loudly. Others clapped with tears in their eyes. The standing ovation grew stronger and stronger until it felt endless. The child stared in complete shock. Backstage, the teacher covered her mouth while crying openly now. The mother hugged the father tightly. Neither could believe what they were witnessing. The child slowly climbed down from the piano bench, still looking confused by the massive reaction. Before leaving the stage, the tiny performer gave one small shy wave toward the audience. The applause somehow became even louder. As soon as the child walked backstage, the mother rushed forward immediately. "You were amazing," she whispered emotionally. The child looked up weakly. "I coughed." The father laughed softly through tears. Nobody cared. The teacher knelt beside the child carefully. "How do you feel?" The child thought for a moment before answering honestly. "Sleepy." That answer made everyone laugh gently, breaking some of the emotional tension. A staff member soon approached backstage with wide eyes. The judges would like to meet the child after the final performances. The parents exchanged nervous looks. "Is that normal?" the father asked quietly. The staff member smiled. "Not usually." The remaining performances continued, but conversations about the little pianist spread quickly through the building. Audience members whispered in hallways. Contestants discussed the performance backstage. Even event workers kept replaying moments from the piece in their minds. One older pianist quietly told another contestant, "That child reminded me why people fall in love with music." Hours later, the competition finally ended. Contestants and families gathered inside the grand hall for the awards ceremony. Giant lights shined across the stage while cameras moved through the audience. The child sat sleepily between the parents, holding the small stuffed animal tightly. Every few minutes came another yawn. The teacher smiled softly. Trying not to fall asleep? The child nodded dramatically. The announcer finally walked onto the stage. The room became silent immediately. Awards for different age groups began first. Applause echoed again and again as winners walked across the stage. But everyone clearly waited for the main International Youth Performance Award. The tension inside the hall grew heavier. The father squeezed the mother's hand nervously. "We already said winning doesn't matter," she whispered softly. "I know." Still, both looked anxious. Finally, the announcer opened the final envelope. The entire room fell silent. This year's first-place winner. Pause filled the air. Then the child's name echoed across the hall. For 1 second, nobody at the family's table moved. The mother blinked rapidly in disbelief. The father stared frozen toward the stage. The teacher covered her face completely. Meanwhile, the child looked around in confusion again. "Did they say me?" The audience laughed warmly while applauding loudly. "Yes," the teacher whispered emotionally. "They said you." The child slowly stood up, still looking half asleep and completely shocked. As the tiny performer walked toward the stage, the audience rose once more into another standing ovation. Cameras flashed everywhere. Some people clapped above their heads. Others simply smiled with tears in their eyes. The child looked overwhelmed by the giant crowd but continued walking carefully toward the announcer. The trophy looked enormous beside such a small body. When it was finally handed over, the child nearly lost balance trying to hold it. The audience laughed softly again. Then something unexpected happened. One of the judges stepped forward and asked quietly into the microphone, "Can I say something?" The room immediately became silent. The elderly judge looked toward the child warmly. "Today, we did not simply hear a talented young pianist," he said softly. "We heard honesty, we heard courage, and we were reminded that music is not about age. It is about heart." The hall exploded into applause once more. The child looked up at the judge curiously and whispered loudly enough for nearby microphones to hear, "My piano teacher says that too." The entire audience laughed warmly. Backstage after the ceremony, reporters crowded nearby hoping for interviews. Cameras pointed everywhere. But the parents kept things brief this time. One reporter asked the child, "How does it feel to win first place?" The child looked down at the giant trophy thoughtfully, then answered with complete honesty, "Very heavy." Even the reporters burst into laughter. Another reporter asked, "What's the secret to playing so beautifully?" The child thought carefully again, then gave a tiny shrug. "I just pretend the piano is talking." That simple answer spread across social media within hours. But inside the quiet backstage room afterward, none of the awards or cameras mattered anymore. The child curled up sleepily beside the mother while still holding the trophy awkwardly. The father sat nearby shaking his head in disbelief. The teacher looked emotional but peaceful. Finally, the mother whispered softly, "Can you believe this journey started with that dusty old piano?" The teacher smiled warmly. "And now the whole world is listening." The child suddenly opened sleepy eyes halfway and whispered something unexpected. "Do you think the old piano would be happy?" For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the father smiled gently. "I think it would be very proud." The ride home from the competition felt quieter than anyone expected. After all the applause, cameras, interviews, and excitement, the family finally sat together inside the train with only soft engine sounds around them. The giant trophy rested carefully beside the father near the window. Meanwhile, the child slept across the mother's lap, still holding the small stuffed animal tightly in one arm. The teacher sat nearby smiling softly every few minutes, almost like she still could not fully believe everything that had happened. Outside the train windows, rain slowly covered the glass while cities and lights passed by in blurry colors. For the first time in weeks, nobody rushed anywhere. No reporters, no performances, no pressure. just silence and relief. The father looked down at the sleeping child and shook his head quietly. Yesterday this kid was crying over a broken crayon. The teacher laughed softly. That's exactly why this story matters. The mother gently brushed hair away from the child's forehead. I just want life to feel normal again. The teacher nodded with complete understanding. The competition victory spread across the internet even faster than before. News channels replayed clips from the performance. Music pages shared emotional reactions from judges and audience members. Famous musicians even posted messages praising the child's natural talent and emotional playing. But back at home, life slowly returned to simple things again. Shoes still ended up in random places near the door. Cartoons still played loudly every morning. The child still asked impossible questions during dinner. One evening, while eating spaghetti, the child suddenly looked serious and asked, "Do pianos get lonely at night?" The parents stared for a second before laughing. "Why are you asking that?" the father said. "Because the old community hall piano is probably alone now." The mother smiled warmly. "Maybe we should go visit it soon." The child's face lit up instantly. Yes. Despite all the online attention, the parents stayed careful. They turned down television offers and large sponsorship requests. Some companies even offered money for advertisements and appearances, but the family refused politely. The father explained it simply one night. "We don't want childhood to disappear." The teacher fully agreed. She continued lessons exactly the same way as before. Sometimes serious practice happened. Other times, lessons turned into silly musical games with made-up songs about pancakes or animals. One afternoon, the child proudly performed a completely invented song called "The Dancing Potato." The teacher clapped dramatically afterward. "A true masterpiece," she joked. The child bowed proudly from the piano bench. Moments like that became important. They protected the joy behind the music. Still, the world outside kept paying attention. Letters arrived from families all over the country. Some parents wrote emotional messages explaining how the child's story inspired their own children to try music. Others thanked the family for showing that talent could grow without pressure or perfection. The mother saved many of the letters inside a small box. One message especially stayed in her heart. It came from a father whose child had become too nervous to continue piano lessons after making mistakes during recitals. After watching the tiny 4-year-old continue playing despite coughing during the competition performance, the little student finally gained confidence again. The mother quietly read that letter twice, then handed it to the father without speaking. After finishing it, he smiled softly. That matters more than trophies. A few weeks later, the family finally returned to the old community hall where everything first began. The building looked exactly the same. The squeaky doors still made noise. The old chairs still wobbled. And in the corner sat the dusty piano. The child ran toward it immediately. "It's still here." The elderly man who used to arrange chairs smiled warmly after seeing the family again. "Well, look who became famous." The child looked confused by the word. "I just play piano." The old man laughed gently. "That's probably the best answer." The mother carefully touched the top of the old piano. Dust still covered parts of it despite recent cleaning attempts. "It all started here," she whispered. The child climbed onto the bench and pressed one familiar key. The same strange clicking sound echoed through the room. Everybody laughed instantly. "That key still sounds funny," the child announced proudly. Then tiny fingers slowly began playing Für Elise once again. This time felt different. No cameras recorded. No judges waited nearby. No pressure filled the air. Only family, memories, and music remained. The notes floated softly through the small community hall, just like the very first day months earlier. The teacher closed her eyes while listening. Back then, nobody imagined this tiny child would one day stand on an international stage winning first place. But somehow, hearing the music inside the simple room felt even more emotional than the giant competition hall. The child reached the middle section and accidentally hit one wrong note. Immediately, tiny hands stopped. "Oh no!" The room became quiet for a second. Then the teacher smiled gently. Keep going. The child looked uncertain. But it was wrong. The father leaned against a chair nearby and grinned. So what? The child stared at the keys for a moment, then slowly smiled too, and continued playing. That small moment meant everything. Months earlier, mistakes caused fear and tears. Now the music continued anyway. After finishing the piece, the child spun around on the piano bench happily. Did the piano miss me? The elderly man laughed loudly. Very much. That evening, the family stayed longer than expected at the community hall. They shared snacks, laughed about old memories, and listened to the child create funny made-up songs between pieces of Beethoven. At one point, the teacher quietly pulled the parents aside. You know, she said softly, very talented children sometimes lose their love for music because the world pushes too hard. The mother nodded slowly. We worried about that too. The teacher smiled while watching the child laugh near the piano. But I think this one will be okay. The father looked toward the child carefully. Why? Because this family protected the child first and the talent second. Those words stayed in the parents' minds long after the conversation ended. As the months passed, life settled into a healthier balance. The child still performed occasionally, but only at events that felt comfortable and joyful. The teacher avoided exhausting schedules or endless competitions. Sometimes performances happened in beautiful theaters. Other times they happened in tiny schools or community centers. The child treated every piano exactly the same way, like a friend waiting for a story. One winter evening, the family sat together watching old videos from the beginning of the journey. The first shaky notes on the dusty piano. Tiny fingers struggling to reach keys. The first local performance. The nervous backstage moments. The national competition victory. The child watched quietly while eating popcorn. Then suddenly asked, "Was I really that tiny?" The parents burst into laughter. "You're still tiny," the father said. The child thought about that seriously before replying, "Good." The teacher smiled softly from the couch nearby. Why good? Because small people can still do big things. The room became silent for a moment after hearing those words. Then the mother quietly wiped tears from her eyes again. Late that night, after everyone else went to sleep, soft piano notes floated through the house once more. The father stepped quietly into the hallway and peeked toward the living room. The child sat alone at the piano in pajamas, feet dangling far above the floor. No audience, no cameras, no competition, only music. Tiny fingers played Für Elise, slowly and peacefully under the soft yellow lamp beside the piano. The father leaned silently against the doorway, listening carefully. The melody sounded calmer now, happier somehow. When the final note faded, the child noticed the father standing there. "Did I wake you up?" came the quiet whisper. The father smiled softly. "No." The child looked down at the piano keys for a moment before speaking again. "I think the piano likes talking at night." The father walked over slowly and sat nearby. "What's it saying tonight?" The child thought carefully, then smiled. "It says thank you for listening." The father felt his chest tighten emotionally, because deep down he realized something important. The world believed the story was about a 4-year-old winning first place at a huge competition. But the real story was much simpler than that. It was about a child who loved music, a family who protected that love, and one old forgotten piano that helped a tiny dream begin.